Hi, and welcome back to Just Ask the Question. I am your host, Brian Karem. With me today, very special guest, Clayton Weimers, who's the North American chair. I guess. Am I going to say?
Director, we call me director usually. I have like four different titles. It's confusing.
I can't do titles anymore. But with Reporters Without Borders, who this group recently published its 2026 annual assessment of press freedom in the world. The United States has fallen 7 slots from 57 down to 64. When you first started this 25 years ago, the United States was ranked 17th of all nations in freedom of the press. Clayton, I welcome you, and I love talking to you about this. This is one of my pet peeves. This is what's happened to the press in the United States. What's caused our fall?
So many things, honestly. It's hard to figure out where to start. We measure on five different indicators in every country that we evaluate: an economic angle, the political landscape, the legislative infrastructure and legal infrastructure, sociocultural context, and the safety situation. And across all five of those indicators, we've seen a decline in the United States.
And what are those? What is the decline?
Well, the decline is, at the legal level. We've seen no meaningful press freedom legislation passed by Congress, and in fact, we've seen them fail to pass any. While at the local and municipal levels, we're seeing those rights being chipped away constantly by legislatures banning reporters from the floors of state capitals, or passing restrictions on how close you can be to a law enforcement officer with a camera, something that's flatly unconstitutional, but states keep trying it. Or banning the press from homeless encampments because they don't want people to see what they're doing when they sweep them. So that's what's happening at the local level. Meanwhile, at the federal level, you've got an FBI that recently raided the home of a Washington Post reporter and took her personal and professional devices and refuses to give them back. So we're being squeezed on both ends there. You look at the political context. I don't think it's that surprising that attacks from politicians are on the rise, and one politician in particular is especially responsible for that. We don't have to say who here, but that's a big part of it. The sociocultural context. Look, we can't sugarcoat it. There's a crisis of trust in the news. People just don't trust the media, and they're turning away from journalism, and in turn, that's causing an economic crisis because people aren't subscribing, and there's less and less money, especially for local news. Seeing on average, 2 local newspapers close every week in this country. Jobs are disappearing. And what that's doing is driving all of the media to consolidate into DC and New York and LA, looking a little bit less like the communities they're supposed to serve and reflecting them less. And there's that feedback circle of why the people distrust the media is because it doesn't actually serve their community the way it once did. And so we're stuck in that vicious cycle. And by the way, you also have consolidation of ownership. Fewer and fewer people with more and more money are buying up the media. And right now we have an added political dimension to that, which is that the people who are buying up media outlets are very close to the president or trying to be very close to the president. And that's pretty problematic.
But let's start with Donald Trump and the presidency. It's the easiest part to decipher. His movements are not, I would say, and I know before we talked, we both agree on that. He is the gas on the fire. He's not the cause. He's a symptom. But he has certainly manipulated the media enough to cause a large part of this problem. And he has there's worldwide consequences for his actions as well. Tell me in your mind what Donald Trump has added to the problem.
I think that's right. If you want to look at one factor for this year's decline, why we went from 57th to 64th, you have to look at Donald Trump and his all-out war on press freedom. Since he came back into the White House, he has not paused at any moment to stop attacking the press. And the real difference between Trump 2.0 and Trump 1.0 is that this time around, it's not just rhetoric. It's not just you are the enemies of the people, you are fake news. It is concrete actions, the consequences of which we will be living with for a long time. Now, I'm talking about defunding public media and attacking the international broadcasters like Voice of America and Radio Free Europe. I'm talking about banning the AP from the White House because they refused to call it the Gulf of America. I'm talking about weaponizing the Department of Justice to go after reporters they don't like Georgia Fort and Don Lemon in Minnesota or Hannah Nathanson at the Washington Post. I'm talking about weaponizing the FCC Brendan Carr has made it very clear that he no longer thinks the FCC is an independent agency, which he thought it was when President Biden was in office. Now he thinks it is a political tool for the MAGA movement, and he's using it to go after Trump's perceived enemies in the media and try to cajole them into more favorable coverage. He's quite literally pitching coverage to the media outlets, saying they should be more patriotic and they should start off
Dictating coverage.
well, I think it's a strong suggestion in the way that when someone shows up at your small business with a baseball bat and says, I strongly suggest you invest in protection.
Yeah, like mob protection.
Yeah.
That's
It's a strong suggestion backed up by, and even Ted Cruz likened what Brendan Carr at the FCC is doing to mobster tactics. It's not often that I agree with Ted Cruz, but on this, he's 100% right, and he's been consistent on that. So, it is not just a Trump problem, but Trump is making the problem worse, and it's not just an American problem. He's making things worse around the world.
Yeah, explain how he's making it worse around the world. That's that I of all the things that we could talk about Trump, I think that's one of the things that people are least likely to understand.
Yeah, and it's understandable that it would be harder to understand because it's not happening right here and now, and also so much is happening right here and now. It's hard to keep track of it all. But I alluded before to the international broadcasters. We have this thing called the U.S. Agency for Global Media, which oversees these international public media broadcasters like Voice of America, Radio Free Europe, Radio Free Asia, the Middle East Broadcast Networks, and the Office of Cuba Broadcasting. Their mission is to bring reliable news to populations living under authoritarianism and censorship. They have a collective audience of over 330 million people a week. It is significant. And in many countries that we work in at RSF, VOA or Radio Free Europe are the most reliable source of independent information. And they're also extremely good at getting around censorship. They have spent years devising systems to circumvent the Iranian regime or the Chinese, the Great Firewall of China, and bring information directly to the people. But one of the first things Trump did was try to shut down the USAGM and those outlets, and we sued to stop him. We've been successful so far. We've saved hundreds of journalists' jobs. Did I lose you? But the government's not complying and not broadcasting, and that's caused a lot of harm around the world. A lot fewer people have access to information now that they previously had. And, not for nothing, but it is this incredibly cheap source of American soft power to just say to the world, look, we'll fund a broadcaster that's even willing to criticize our own government because that's a display of how great American values are. But now the Trump administration is saying, why would we pay for journalists to criticize us or to ask us tough questions? That doesn't make any sense. They just don't understand that press freedom should be a core American value that's completely independent of.
I maintain they understand it. They just don't like it.
They don't believe in soft power, I should say. There's an even more direct way that we've seen it. I'll give an example. In Serbia, the biggest fact checker in the country found itself raided early in 2025 by the police. And when the Ministry of Justice put out a press release to explain why it happened, they pointed to the fact that this fact checker got a USAID grant. And they know that USAID is a criminal organization because Elon Musk and Doge said so. And so they're not even making us work to connect the dots there. They're outright saying, we're taking the cues from Trump. We're cracking down on the media. It's not always quite so overt. There's a lot more subtle ways that it's happening around the world. But, other leaders in other countries take note when the United States signals that press freedom doesn't matter to us anymore.
So, all right. So that's Donald Trump. I want to dive a little bit now into, all right, we have fallen from 17th to 64th in the last 25 years. I would maintain that's about halfway through the fall, that the original fall of the United States and press freedom began under Ronald Reagan and getting rid of the fairness doctrine and allowing media companies to buy themselves out. I honestly believe that the U.S. press at its pinnacle was during the Watergate era, and not only it was Watergate that was investigated and reported on, but you had the Pentagon Papers from the New York Times and the Washington Post. At that point in time, proving that an independent press can be effective against a tool against a government and an authoritarian regime. And since then, it's been 45 years of constant browbeating by every federal government official to overturn what the press actually does. So that today it means very little. 80% of what you see, read, or hear when I first got into this business 40 some odd years ago was owned by a couple of dozen media companies. Today, you got a handful, four or five, that own 90 or 95%. You talk about local reporting. Laws that have been enacted keep people from covering it, but it's the from covering news, but also the consolidation of news. I look at the Courier Journal, which was this newspaper. I had no desire to work anywhere else but the Courier. Always one of the top 10 newspapers in the country. I began working there. They sold it out to Gannett. Its largest, it had a circulation of 300,000. Now I could, what is it, 10, 15, 20,000? It went from a staff that owned a whole building to a staff that can now fit in my garage. And at the same time, while that's decreased, regional journalistic endeavors, companies across the country have also receded. So while you used to have in the state government, when I covered the state government in Kentucky in the 80s, there were probably 6, 7 dozen reporters covering that. Today, there's three or four. So everywhere from federal to state and local, we've seen, as you pointed out, a recess of people actually doing the job. It's so there's twice the number of people on this planet as on the day that I was born, and a quarter of the number of reporters. A lot of that has to do with consolidation, but you're right. At the federal government, if we get away from Trump for a second, Jamie Raskin has tried to pass, in various different incarnations, basically a national shield law. It's been called many things. I testified. I helped him. He said, "Oh, look, he, thankfully, I give him thanks for it, but I don't know how true it is." He said, "Well, you were one of the impetuses behind it because of the fact that I went to jail 4 times." So I get all that, but it's never passed, while you have both the right and the left saying that the press is slanted to the right or the left. We're slanted towards money. But at the end of the day, I guess my question is, where do you see it? I'd like to see 2 things happen. I'd like to see them bust up the media monopolies, limit media companies from having contracts with the government, which leads to a conflict of interest, which is why you have the problems with the Washington Post that you have today, or Paramount. That the consolidation there when Paramount took it over was because Donald Trump had sued CBS for what? What they do on a daily basis? Edit? So you tell me, is there something that Congress can do, and what would you recommend steps would be?
Well, you alluded to Jamie Raskin's Press Act, which really is,
In its latest incarnation, that's what it's called. This is his 3rd time trying to pass it.
in my view, that is Exhibit A of the failures of Congress to lift a finger to protect press freedom in recent years. I mean, this is something that passed the House unanimously that last in 2024. And then the Senate just never brought it to a vote for no particularly good reason. This is a bill that would have passed easily, we know, because we did the work to make sure it would. And so, we've been talking about Donald Trump here. I don't want to let Democrats off the hook. Democrats could
No,
have
Biden administration was just as bad. Or
Democrats could have passed the Press
yeah,
Act. And by the way, this was happening during a time when they were campaigning saying Donald Trump is going to be a dictator if he's elected. Well, if you really believe that, maybe you should have closed the loophole that lets the feds pry into the conversations between journalists and their sources. As it turns out, that is something that Trump seems to be very keen to do. So, yeah, that's like really the most basic legislative fix for one particular problem. But if they can't even do that, I am very skeptical that we're going to get to a place where we can see wholesale reforms that are going to lead to major change, at least not without some sort of reckoning at the national level. We have to look at ourselves hard in the mirror and say, do we really value press freedom? And if so, what does it look like to actually value press freedom? I think one of the central problems is that people are turning away from journalism. And that kind of causes all the other problems. So you think about the economics, well, people are turning away from journalism towards other sources of information, so they're not paying for the news anymore.
independent online media.
Yeah. And so that's, there's the economic problem. People are turning away towards other sources of information because they don't trust the news anymore. And by the way, because there's a
That's what the
low.
government wants, is it not? I mean, it seems like the government has engineered all of this over the last 40 years. Granted, billionaires are in league with Lucifer or the government, but they're working together. It's in their best interest, not in ours. So yes, both the right and the left have given you the narrative that you cannot trust the media. They're right, but for the wrong reasons. And where are we in crafting a narrative to show people why we are important? That's where you guys come in.
And frankly, I think that's what we as a press freedom community need to do a better job of, is explaining the value of
I'm all
journalism.
in. Put me to work. Put me in, coach.
Look, if this were any other industry, if there was a crisis of trust in the automotive industry, the big CEOs of all the companies would get together in their automotive manufacturers association and hire a PR firm and do a big splashy reputation campaign that makes people love cars again. And we'd see Super Bowl ads and billboards and endorsements from celebrities, and they'd go all in and make us like cars again. But there's no one who can do that for journalism. One, because there's no money in it. Two, because all the journalists just see that all the media see themselves as competitors and aren't going to really cooperate on something like that. So you see it at an individual level where, the New York Times does good marketing on why journalism matters, and, puts out good editorials and op-ed statements, ed board statements. And there was a time when the Washington Post had democracy doesn't die in the darkness as on its masthead.
Yes,
So
it died in the full in the light of the sun.
So you see that at the level of individual media outlets, but no one coming together for the good of reporters. And I have this dream of building that movement somehow. It's going to take an awful lot of money. It might require another thing that journalists really don't want to do, but get into politics. And
We're in politics. That's
I
the
know, but
thing.
that's
We're
another
in
thing.
it.
That's another thing. Any other industry would do this. They would have a super PAC that would start playing in elections and try to influence primaries so that pro press freedom candidates start winning in Republican primaries and Democratic primaries. And that way we actually get a Congress that might take some of this seriously. But there's no one holding their feet to the fire on these issues because
Clayton, we can't even get reporters in the briefing room at the White House who understand how we work. That after the shooting the other night, a young reporter asked, I believe it was it was on Monday, so asked the presidential PEP secretary, will the president bring the White House Correspondents Association to the White House? Is he going to host it there? And without even understanding, and she's a member of the WHCA, that it's our party, that the president has nothing to do with that unless he's invited. It doesn't even understand the workings of the very event that they went to, much less understand the workings of how to ask a question in the briefing room. It used to be when I first walked into that briefing room, I remember Helen Thomas, first person I met. Second person I met was Sam Donaldson. And Sam said, listen, and he pointed to the first row in the Brady briefing room. He said, there's probably 200 years of experience there. Listen to every one of them. And in those 7 seats today, if you do if you looked at those 7 seats, I doubt that you would find 100 years experience there. It's not what it used to be. The institutional knowledge that we once had about how to even do our job is lacking. And that's because the corporations that hire the reporters hire them when they're younger, so they cost less. And then when they get a certain amount of experience, they boot them out to bring in someone else who costs less. I don't know how you defeat the fact that we don't even know why we're there anymore. Sorry, end of rant.
no,
Question.
I mean, I get it. I get it. And look, I'll be the optimistic one here
Good.
because I know so many amazing journalists who are doing incredible work and getting underpaid and underappreciated for it
Yes.
all over the world. And they don't do it because they want to be famous and they want to end up on
No.
TV. They do it because it's a calling and they don't know what else they could ever do and be satisfied. No,
It's a
no one gets
public
into journalism.
service.
No one gets into journalism to get rich. It's because you have to do it, and it means that the people who choose this job tend to be very tenacious and resilient, and kind of hard to bully at the end of the day. And I'm thinking of people like Georgia Ford, who I was sitting next to at the White House Correspondents' Dinner, who was there despite the fact that the president who was speaking is currently pursuing her in court for doing her job in Minneapolis. I'm thinking of Shelley Kittleson, who was a couple tables over in that at that dinner, and a couple weeks after being freed from Hezbollah terrorists as a hostage in Iraq, now suddenly is ducking under a table at the correspondence dinner. These are journalists who are showing up every day and doing the job, and not seeking glamour and not seeking fame, but they are helping us understand our world better. And at the end of the day, like, there are so many journalists who are doing that good work. I think we can always highlight the best of journalism.
Well, it'd be nice if the dinner actually did that, but that's another story. I won't go into that. All right, so here's my question for you. We've talked a little bit about the federal problem. What about at the state and local level? What can we do there, and what is wrong there? I'll preface it by saying, look, there are so-called vast journalism deserts or newspaper deserts all across the country. Every place I've ever worked for has been bought out or closed. Every one in the 40 years that I've been there, except for WKYT TV in Lexington, which hasn't been bought or sold since I was there. But every newspaper, every network, everything I've ever done. And I watch the consolidation, and I see that there are no good newspapers. You said 2 a day are closing. I think newspapers are dying, and I think it's because the government's killed it. I don't think there's less of a demand for it. I see parents all the time going, wanting the little community newspapers and going, they want to clip the pictures out and put them on the refrigerator of their kid. There's still a demand for the written word, but we're not supplying it. So what's the answer there?
I see a vicious cycle. I see the news business falling on hard times and finding a tough way to make a living, and reducing its output. And as a result, politicians are under less scrutiny and are able to get away with things and pass more restrictions on access to information, which in turn, makes it harder to do journalism. And we're just like going around in this circle. Things that are happening at the local level, I think about, like, here's one that was really under the radar in Puerto Rico late last year. The governor rushed through a bill that was never even read in the legislature that chipped away at what was a very strong freedom of information law in Puerto Rico. And they deliberately did it the week before Christmas so that no one would notice. And so we noticed and very quickly got in touch with the governor's office, and sent a letter and put out statements and tried to mobilize people. But, it's the week before Christmas in Puerto Rico. It's not that easy to get people all together. And so they just passed this in the dead of night, and got away with it. And so, we're trying to see what we can do next there. But, that's a great example of, if there was more robust local reporting. And I'm not saying there was no local reporting on it. That's how we found out about it. Local reporters flagged it for us. But this is the kind of thing that local politicians try to get away with when they think no one's watching.
Yep, that's very true. So all of those problems have figured into the worsening scope of journalism in the United States. I want to read from, this is the press freedom at a 25-year low. This is from your all's release. For the first time in history, over half of the world's countries now fall into the difficult or very serious categories for press freedom. In 25 years, the average score of all 180 countries and territories has never been so low. In the United States, reporters have faced detention, firing, scrutiny, prosecution. We haven't been shot and killed yet, like in other countries, but
Well,
we have. Yes, go
actually,
ahead.
I'm talking to you from Las Vegas right now, and a few years ago, a legendary local reporter, Jeff Gurman, was
Yes, I know, Jeff.
murdered by
Yeah.
a county executive who lost re-election, not in small part due to Jeff's reporting on scandals in his office. That is maybe not part of the clean narrative of how we think of press freedom deteriorating because of things that are happening in Washington. But a politician murdering a journalist who covered him on his own front lawn, like, that is that is a key to understanding why things have gotten so bad in this country. And now, we're lucky that we do live in a place where, Jeff's killer is in jail and, is not getting out.
Thankfully.
You look at countries further down the list on that index, and that's not a given, where the justice system can't go to work for people like Jeff. Uh, it
Well,
worries me that we're seeing a breakdown in the rule of law at the same time that we're seeing this breakdown in press freedom, because that combination is incredibly dangerous.
yeah, let's talk a little bit about Israel. Uh, Responsible for more deaths of journalists in the last year than every other country combined. It's impossible to cover the war there. They have told that announced that journalists are actually with Hezbollah and are fighting against them, pretending to be reporters. I don't know how many, and I knew a couple of the reporters that were killed by Israel. They're doing 3 or 4 different broadcasts a day. I don't know how it is you lead insurgencies while you're standing live on television doing the news, but hey, that's just me, an old reporter. How problematic is Israel to this equation?
Well, you said it. Israel is killing more journalists than any other state, any other single actor, and we're running out of ways to describe the carnage. Just a couple weeks ago, they killed another journalist in Lebanon in a deliberate targeted airstrike, and then blocked the Red Cross from being able to access her because she was still alive for several hours. We were aware of her location. We were trying to get the Red Cross in to rescue her, and it's entirely possible that she could have been saved. But the Israelis made a choice there. They've also made a choice to deny all journalists access to Gaza. Not a single international reporter is permitted to enter Gaza except under very rare and very controlled circumstances, escorted by IDF soldiers, which is not the full picture, obviously. In fact, just yesterday, they kidnapped 3 more journalists who were covering a flotilla of peace activists and aid workers 60 miles off the coast in international waters, 2 Al Jazeera journalists and a Zateo journalist. I have unconfirmed information that they have been released and are on their way to another country. So I'm waiting for confirmation that that is actually going to happen. But that is, that's par for the course for Israel. Is It's a total media blackout in Gaza. The only images and stories we have out of Gaza are coming from the brave Gazan journalists themselves, who are also targets of this war, who have seen well over 250 of their colleagues killed over the past 3 years. And I don't know what makes it stop. We can call on Israel to stop murdering journalists till we're blue in the face, but they didn't start killing journalists with this war. They killed Shireen Abu Akleh, who was a U.S. citizen, and the Biden administration essentially
Turn the other cheek.
gave them a pass for it, which
Yeah.
I'll never forget that.
I won't. Or Jamal Khashoggi. I mean, we knew exactly what that was all about. There have been documentaries on it, but because of the oil and the monetary interest there, we haven't done anything about that either.
That's right.
So my question going forward is, can you predict how do you see this going? How far or how long before the United States is like Israel? Do we get that way? Do you think it's headed in that direction? Are you worried about jailing and killing of journalists in this country?
I'm definitely worried about jailing and killing of journalists. I don't think I'm an optimist. I wouldn't do this work if I didn't think it could get better. I'd just go home. And we do see victories all the time. And maybe we need to get better at talking about the good things that we're able to accomplish instead of just always harping on the problems that we identify. But there are, we can't pretend there aren't solutions out there. We, in fact, as part of our index report, we have an entire article just on all the solutions that we're proposing to the various problems we've identified in different countries all around the world. It's not rocket science, we need stronger institutions. We need stronger legal protections for journalists. We need to close loopholes that let national security laws be weaponized against journalists. We need to find new funding sources for journalism, and there's a lot of different ways to do that. It's just going to require some political willpower.
Well, there you go. Let's end this on a hopeful note. So, how can people help? Where would you like to have them turn to, and what do you recommend that they do?
Well, first and foremost, keep reading the news, keep watching the news, keep subscribing. Don't turn away from journalism like so many people are. And if you are listening to this, you probably haven't. So maybe try to talk to your friends and family who have and explain to them the reason that journalism is a better way to get informed than, say, content creators or influencers is because journalists learn how to report with ethics. It sounds basic, but when a journalist gets it wrong, you can trust that they will give you a retraction and a correction. When an influencer gets it wrong, they're just going to move on or double down on being wrong. And to me, that's the central difference between journalism and other sources of information online. And I'm not saying you can't be informed by other types of people. Just don't turn away from journalism. And if you really want to get involved, you can go to rsf.org, sign up for our newsletter. We publish constantly about all the countries of the world, especially the United States. And so we're always up to date on what's going on in the world. And definitely check out the 2026 World Press Freedom Index report, which is plastered all over our homepage right now. There's a lot of good stuff in there.
Well, I will close with saying that journalism is a team effort. It takes ethics, it takes finding vetted facts, and it's not for the faint of heart. But the joy in the public service makes it worthwhile. So I appreciate you, Clayton. I really do. And I want to thank everyone for joining us. This is Just Ask the Question. And by the way, I've got a hope too. So keep hope alive, and we'll catch you guys next time.